Hello and welcome to Let the Bird Fly, a podcast about living freely in a world given back to us. This is Wade here in the podcast studio, joined by my dear friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Michael Berg. And Jason is also here. We are attempting, with very primitive technology, our very first ever recording of the three of us in the podcast studio, both co-hosts and our perpetual guest. Here. Have we decided, is he co-host or is he perpetual guest?
That's an interesting thing because when you say co-host, in my mind, I always think two.
It does seem like two to me.
But I suppose co-host can mean a multiple. We should look that up.
I think status has changed depending on the mood of the day. That is often what
This is also
happened.
true.
Yeah.
So for our first ever recording, I wore sleeves, even though I am going to the gym after this for leg day, to which I invited both of you. Will either of you be joining me?
I'll be driving to Michigan.
Oh, okay. You're going fishing, I assume, from the shirt,
Right,
Jason.
yeah. Oh, I have setting update on that later if you want. But no, my daughter and her
It takes them so long to just say basic data.
just got back in town.
And they need to see you?
From their honeymoon.
Yeah,
Oh, they were like, man, we missed Dad.
Do they need money or something?
probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
The Michael, I appreciate you are dressed, I think, very smartly. You look casual yet distinguished, and I wish you a safe trip to Michigan. Michael and I weighed ourselves before this, and we both trended the wrong way.
By a lot.
Mike went to Europe, so he has a good reason for that. Jason's daughter's wedding that he just mentioned sent me on a little carb spiral.
Yeah.
And so
I
gotta pull myself out of it. I'm starting the process, and so we're gonna be fighting back.
I see you are in Chippewa maroon.
Yeah.
Fire up, ready to go.
Yeah. The we have two lapel mics that we're testing for this. I've been using one for some stuff and they worked well. We only have two. If this works well, I will save up some money and try to get a set of 4. But we had to decide of the 3 of us who gets the 2 mics, and
Mike was going to get one.
we won't say why or how, but it was decided that Mike and I would have the microphone. So if Jason sounds a little bit different, that's because he does not have a lapel yet. We should have a GoFundMe to get Jason a mic. And see if the listeners actually want it. How much do they want him to have a mic?
All right.
But we'll see how this sound is working in the video. We are going to be discussing today. I could have swore we did an episode on this before, but I didn't find it when I was scrolling back through, but maybe I didn't search very well. But on the fact that God is not an idea and what that means for preaching, teaching, and ministry, for administering the sacraments. We've talked a lot about God's presence, but I think also something that has happened, in the West, post-Enlightenment, maybe even a little bit before that, is that God kind of at some point got put in our head a little bit too much, so that we think about God in a way differently than we would think about any other person in our lives. I was presenting somewhere and I said, I have to think of God like I think of my Uncle Bob. Right? My Uncle Bob's a real person. He's a nice little Polish man. He was a nuclear engineer, built a dune buggy, great guy. God is an actual person. In fact, he's 3 persons in one God. And so I think this becomes important for what we see what's happened with the church in the West as well in many ways, where we go to church to get an inspirational talk, or we go to church to get fed some data, or we go to church to shape our ideas about God. And right, you can have clergy who desperately think they need to then shape people's ideas about God so that they will like God, right, to justify the ways of God to men. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. I have had recently people clamor for the return of the free-for-all. We will have to do a free-for-all at some point. Maybe we can get Ben and Peter to come back for it as well, do some animal fights talk. But we will not have the free-for-all, but would Jason or Michael. Jason, it's to your right if you would like to do it. Michael, it's on the wall. I don't know how good your eyes are if you can
Let's
see
see
that.
how good my eyes are.
Okay.
Now that I've been moved a good 5 feet.
This is good because I don't know if Jason can read, so.
This show doesn't speak for our churches or church bodies or our employers. To be honest, much of the time it probably doesn't speak for us. We will be thinking out loud a lot, so approach what you hear with a healthy skepticism, because, well, as a responsible resident of planet Earth, that's probably what you should generally do with almost everything. If you find yourself getting too worked up, tune out, look around, and realize you were just listening to a podcast. That's right, a podcast. So go live free, friends, and don't let us get in the way.
Until listeners have recommended, dear listeners, if you're listening, that software that I also believe Charlie uses, but until I get that, I can't figure out how to get the music to come through for the people on the video. So I'm just going to talk so that they don't just hear silence.
Really? You can't do that, huh?
Well, I think it's supposed to be free software that we can get, so I will have to learn to tinker with that. I thought Jason was going to do it, but...
Well, as department head, you get to hire a student worker. Maybe the student worker could help out with that.
Yeah, I get to go to training for that. I'm excited for that.
Sounds fun.
Jason, people don't like when you talk. And that brings us to our main topic, which is that God is not an idea. If you think about how you think about God, I would guess that all of us, a lot of the time, fall into thinking about God as if he were an idea. It's always kind of crazy to me when I stop and think about that, because God is right there. God is omnipresent, right? And it must be pretty weird for God to just sometimes be like there and be like, oh, they're thinking about me again, as if he were some remote thing. When we think about God, we often then kind of treat him like Plato, right? I remember when I was teaching in Michigan, I had a student in Western Civ, and he failed, but spectacularly. And the essay was supposed to be on Plato, the philosopher. And he thought it meant Play-Doh, like what you play with as a kid. And I mean here, like what you play with as a kid, Play-Doh, where if we approach God as an idea, it becomes something that we think we can shape. And so we're going to then shape God in our own image, which is what we see happen through much of human history, where gods are made in the image of man, because that's what
all you have.
Human beings know, right? Whereas if we remember the very beginning of the scriptures, God flips it and we are made in the image of God. God is not an idea, and God is very intentional in what he does here. And so we've hit a fair amount on the presence of God, the presence of Christ, the saving presence of Christ in word and sacrament. But I thought today maybe we could talk a little bit about what happens when we treat God simply as an object of our reflection or speculation. There was historically, Lutheran theologians are very uncomfortable with speculative theology, right? We don't confessional Lutheran theologians, I should say, are very nervous about speculative theology. And there's a healthy reason for that. We recognize that you're getting away from what God has actually revealed about himself. Right? And you're now guessing at things. And God has come to us in such a way in Scripture and natural in nature, so that reason can determine some things that we don't have to speculate on a lot. Now, what we do want to know is the stuff he hasn't said. I was preaching on the Lord's Prayer yesterday. You were presiding at McGuanago or preaching, Michael?
Presiding.
Okay. And then I saw this guy. I was watching the live stream. You guys let him help with communion, huh?
Yep, that's right.
It's a little dress-up time for Jason.
Yeah.
But John preached on prayer, that's right. And who is also now second vice president of the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod. You both got to hear the second vice president of the Wisconsin Synod, who is also the second vice president of the Southeastern Wisconsin District, preach. Does he have a ring or anything yet?
I'm not sure what the vice president of the United States does, let alone the vice president of a district of a very small confessional Lutheran body does. Go to meetings, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah. But the Holy Gospel was Jesus giving the Lord's Prayer, and he gives it in answer to a request from his disciples. Well, Lord, teach us to pray. And I was hitting on at Resurrection that we sometimes can get lost in talking about prayer, right? How does prayer work? How does God hear everyone's prayers? What's the exact right prayer? What exactly should I ask for or not ask for? And we miss that the main point Scripture makes about prayer is God wants you to do it, that he wants you to talk to him. And I think we can do the same with the person and work of Christ and of the Holy Trinity, that we can spend so much time trying to nail down the data that we can miss the thrust of what God actually wants us to know, which is who he says he is and what he has done. And so I'll throw it to either of you maybe. Why do you think it's so tempting for us to treat God as an idea, and what do you see as maybe some obstacles to preaching and teaching and ministry if we ourselves fall into that approach or feel like we need to play to people who have that approach?
I'll maybe make one observation and then touch on that. I think this is not a modern or contemporary phenomenon. I mean, this is something that has been going on for a while. Like if you read,
I suppose Plato's doing it, already when he's trying to figure out,
But and among Lutherans, people have noticed this. Like if you read some of the 19th century or early 20th century Lutheran theologians in our country, they'll talk about that too. Of course, it's before the days of Play-Doh, but I think they usually use the term like wax nose, like you're putting on a disguise.
Yeah, Luther likes to use that. Yeah,
that you can shape. Yeah, and so I mean, it goes back to Reformation even. The this idea that you can form God and make his face look the way you want it to look. And I think the appeal of that, of course, I think is people who, each of whom carry a sinful nature, do not like being confronted with God and God as he reveals himself in his word and says, this is how things are and this is how they aren't, and this is what is right and this is what isn't. And it's a whole lot easier and more comfortable, I think, for people to say, I would much rather have a God who conforms a little more to my own personal preferences, my own that praises the things that I do well, and really doesn't talk about the things that I struggle with. I think all of those type of things go into the appeal of saying, let's shape God in the way that we want him to be, and conform him to my own ideas.
So the prophet Isaiah says, surely you're a God who hides, right? And we don't mean that, well, God's mysterious because he's not us, he's hidden to us just because we don't have all the perspective. No, that's an active he hides. And so the temptation, and we all fall into this sin, is to, even if we don't outwardly think it or say it, is to blame God for this. Like, give me more information, then I won't have to speculate, right? Now, of course, he would probably say the same thing that I do to my students, and that is, when you get upset about not having this answer from God directly, and you want more information, remember that when I assign you 20 chapters of Isaiah, then you don't want as much information, right? Mm-hmm. So he's trying to give you the information that you need, right, to find him where. And the other thing about that is there must be room for faith. And why must there be room for faith? Because it's a relationship of love and trust. And it's not a relationship of, I have all the data about God, and therefore I have concluded that he is a good God, and therefore I will trust him. That's not love anymore. And so I don't know that we appreciate always that kind of, Luther says this a fair amount, I think, like there's got to be room for faith. Well, why? Well, because faith is a essential aspect of love, and God is love, and that's how we can put together faith and love and not separate them like often people do, seeing it through as faith versus works kind of thing. But the other thing about the idea thing, and it's always been there, right? Like we're always going to speculate about God. I was just looking at what's up next. I preached this Sunday. The first lesson is from Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a little bit of,
and it's like a bit from all over the place. Yeah,
I haven't looked. I just saw it was the Ecclesiastes at the beginning, and then I'm sure various verses. Yeah.
it really is. It's going to be a fun Sunday because it's the rich fool as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's all true. However, there is kind of a very modern way of thinking about God where he is distant. And if he's distant, it's a lot easier to make him an idea, right? So use an example. Let's say there's a teenager who is in love with the idea of being in love and has this idea of the perfect girl or the perfect guy. And that's distant because it's in their dreams, it's in their thoughts, that kind of stuff. And then they get a boyfriend or girlfriend, and pretty quickly you're like, well, that guy's kind of an idiot sometimes, or girls can smell too, and they can be annoying. That's the real thing versus an idea thing. So my point here is only to say, when you place God up in heaven and you emphasize that part of God's sovereignty, he's got a plan for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's not in your face incarnationally.
Yeah.
Therefore, it is so much easier to then not have to deal with the tough questions. Why did God send this and do this? And then you fill in the gaps the way you want them to be filled in.
Yeah.
Right?
Job's friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, again, nothing new under the sun. But there is definitely, let me put it this way. In the modern world, what the phenomenon of the modern world was that you could have a space that was secular. The rest of the history of the world didn't have a non-spiritual space. In fact, if I would say the word secular, they probably think profane, as in like almost you're doing something that is definitely not spiritual to offend the spiritual, rather than there's these two spheres, right? Now, Luther's going to talk about two spheres when it comes to like God's kingdom and stuff, and I could see quite a few, and we know of quite a few modern Roman Catholics saying, see, the Reformation just destroyed everything. But his concern was not that there's these two spheres that needed to be separated. I don't think he was that naive. His concern was law and gospel, right? So that's so important for us to understand, especially in an American context where we conflate the two kingdoms with the separation of church and state, even though they are connected. What I'm saying is, never before did you have the thought pattern which would say, here is a secular space and here is a spiritual space. And so the spiritual then becomes very much an idea. Yeah. I mean, spirit and ideas kind of go together, rather than.
And you see this happen in philosophy as well. That German idealism, which is heavily influenced by kind of a secularizing Protestantism.
Yeah. When Roman Catholics say, even of the time in the Reformation, that this is going to destroy the world, they weren't wrong.
Right.
They weren't wrong. And I would like us to do maybe an episode on this. This is a tangent, but sort of in our cultural moment right now. There's a lot going on, but thinking in terms of law, right? Like everything's about law. And when you have a culture that has a heavily gospel influence, which would be the Christian West, and of course people are going to always bring in the opinion legacy law, but the idea that everybody matters and that there's a loving, unconditional forgiveness that comes from God, even if we try to chip away at that with decision theology, work righteousness, or whatever. There is an idea of love and forgiveness that inevitably in a broken, sinful world is going to lead to a society where freedoms are going to be abused, and you're going to have to put up with certain things. It's sort of kind of free speech, like, because free speech is such an important thing, we will put up with really awful ideas.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a society that is not based on that sort of gospel leading to freedom, you live in a law society. Now, you don't have to deal with rampant pornography, because that's tamped down. But you are going to lose quite a few freedoms. Think Saudi Arabia versus Portugal or something
and
like that.
You're losing the gospel view of people as gift and dignity, and then law becomes simply about rights, which becomes power. Yeah.
So when the Christian in America would like to see a little bit more control of sin, be very careful what you wish for. You have to, if you're going to live in a law society, it's not going to be as wild. Like there's going to be, if we will just execute the person who's the pedophile. That's what we do here. But we're also probably going to make our women wear, all sorts of certain dress and that kind of stuff. You're going to give something up. In a place where there has been gospel freedom, right? Most likely you're going to have to put up with some sinners, public sinners, right? I think that's an interesting topic someday to talk about. But back to our...
Well, and connecting with this, the law can work with a remote, abstract God, right? In fact, that was part of the attraction to laws of nature, all sorts of even that we're going to have crimes against humanity and basic laws that are for all humanity and not just places. We had, it's waning maybe somewhat, but we had a real faith that we could find objective laws on which everything can operate or should operate, and we'll operate on that basis. And it's cool to have a creator behind that, a lawgiver, right? That's nice. But it's very abstract. It's not a God who is very involved because he stands back because there's laws. And so I think that does tie into that the gospel can only be real gospel if you have a personal, present God, right? That God can't be remote and abstract. There's people who try to do it. There's a remote, abstract God who really loves you just the way you are. But that's not how gospel as gospel actually functions.
Right, and so notice even those who treat God more of a ideal or better yet, a distant God, rather than emphasizing the incarnational, sacramental, the word actually
Imminence,
does something. And you can trace this, you can see hints of this even in Augustine, right?
And Augustine.
Yeah, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And you still want...
Augustine of Hippo.
You still want that personal connection. So the language, ironically, is my personal relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I have never once talked about...
And your personal relationship with Jesus totally hinges on him not being too actual,
Well,
fleshy.
this is something I think we need to point out. I have never once saw or articulated the relationship with a friend, a relative, my wife, my children, as this is my personal relationship with my daughter. Why is that? Because I don't need to overemphasize that because I actually live it.
Right. And you don't
So
own that relationship.
yeah,
You're in that relationship with your daughter. You're two persons in relationship based on trust and love. To the personal sometimes is really privatizing it
yeah,
so that I own it, I control it.
you're overemphasizing too.
Right.
Like like I think here's the let me finish the analogy. I don't talk about having a personal relationship with Wade Johnston. But if somehow
You can start doing that.
if I somehow knew somebody super famous,
Like Wade Johnston.
like not Wade the Rock Johnston, but Dwayne the Rock Johnson, I would talk about my relationship with that celebrity in the abstract as I brag to you.
Mm-hmm.
I have this friend. Like I don't go around saying I have this friend Jason Oakland.
Yeah, no one says that.
I don't, but I would say I would talk in terms of a distant idea because it's not about the celebrity and my relationship with that. It's that I get to tell you that I have this relationship with it. And because it's sort of vague and distant, I can sort of frame it the way I want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very good analogy. So when someone says, "I have this," do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? I'm like, yeah, but I don't talk that weirdly about it. And because it's actually, he died, he baptized. I mean, it's very intimate, right? He's still God, and could snap his finger, and I could, I fear him, right? He's not my friend.
Well, in that, one of the things that I think that we say today, that even though I think you both have rightly pointed out that this is a long-running thing where people like to treat God as an idea, shape God in their image, but something that much of human history would not have been able to wrap their head around, just like you talked about the distinction of secular and sacred, is when people today will say, like, well, I just can't believe in a God like that. As if, like, they're liking or not liking something about this idea of a God disqualifies. Most people in history would have got that the gods and the goddesses or God, they are what they are.
Yeah, whether you
and you're going to have to deal with them. This is who they are. And I think we see this even sometimes amongst Christians who have this impulse to kind of clean up God in the scriptures, especially get to some of the Old Testament and things get a little messy.
Fancy word is theodicy.
Yeah, and because we don't want a God that's too much like that. God is God. Like, we're not going to one day get to heaven and see God and be like, I was hoping he'd be a little bit more like this or that. He is God. He is perfect. He is all in all. And we, with our tiny heads, have certain things revealed to us that we can come to know now. But otherwise, we are the lesser partner in a relationship with a very real thing that in no way is dependent upon our thinking or preferences.
And like that whole thing of trying to like clean up God. I mean that's where a lot of the early impulses toward allegory come from, right?
Yeah.
They're like, ooh, this God isn't looking so good here.
Yeah.
This must be
so godly. We need to. There must be a deeper meaning here. And
Yeah.
So that's at least in the earlier days of the church, and really gets going through the Middle Ages. That's why they're doing some of that.
And then fast forward to the demythologizing, where God's not palatable to a so-called enlightened mind, not just because of miracles, but because of the destruction in the Old Testament. Yeah. And so this all must be just a story, because it's just too hard to wrap your head around something that you can't, right? And so going to the idea thing, if I can't understand it, therefore it must not be true.
Right.
Only the modern man.
Or if it doesn't fit my momentary sense of justice, then it must not be just.
Only modern man could be that blindly ignorant and arrogant at the same time.
Yeah.
Like we've said this before, you're allowed to be a little bit ignorant. You can even be a little bit arrogant, but you can't be both. And modern man often was that. despite all of the knowledge. In fact, precisely because of all of the knowledge. So I really like that you brought up the idea when someone, or the example of somebody saying, I just can't, I just can't believe in a God that would do this.
Right.
Now, the logic there is so blatantly stupid.
Right.
Like, what I want to say is like, well,
That's like saying Hitler didn't exist because I can't believe in a Führer who would behave like that.
If you could wish away things, I got a list.
Right.
You know,
But
you're living in make believe.
Yeah.
But to the point, just the fact that you assume that the assumption there is that God is an idea that is formed by man,
Right.
and not a other external being,
Right.
that exists whether you believe he exists or not.
Right. And again, back to Uncle Bob, right? That he is who he is. And it, you know, I joke about Hitler, but it's the opposite with God. God's goodness, just as Hitler's evil stands out, God's goodness is greater than anything we can understand. God's goodness is so great that he turned the worst Friday right into Good Friday. And we're never going to comprehend things in their totality.
Including righteousness, justice,
Yeah, you think
love.
of a good novel, and there's plenty of points in a good novel. If it ends well, you look back at those points, and those actually turn out to be really good, important things. And maybe you were nervous in there, you weren't sure about, you know, that scene originally, but it only makes sense in the whole. And such is also the case with God, who, by the way, in the Old Testament, did not have the best people to work with.
No.
You know, you read some ancient Near Eastern customs, and let's just say, most, like, you know, peace-loving, you know, let's all get along Americans would be pretty shocked, you know, at the level of not coexisting.
Which to that, my previous, let's do an episode on this, tangent in that episode that we could do is to say, when someone wakes up and says, in 2025, and says, injustice, first of all, where do you get that sense of justice from?
Right.
Pretty sure it's going to be from a Christian God. You are living off the borrowed capital of this.
Yeah.
You have no idea how
Yeah.
bad it was. You, like, can you imagine just going around and, like, I don't know, just 3rd century pick a place and being like, that's mean.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you have no idea how good you have it precisely because of the Christian
And
message.
in these conceptions, the capital of which we're living on now didn't come through primarily because of abstraction. It came through because of convictions that there's a very real God who has said very real things about himself and human beings and this world. And so we want to order things according to them. You know, we should have an episode where we just do accept a lot of the stuff Protestants get blamed for and say, well, that is all true, but you should still be a Lutheran. But
Yeah. No, that's a good. I think that would actually be very helpful.
Yeah, there were things that people said slippery slope were going to happen, and man, that slope was slippery
And it did happen.
pretty quickly.
It happened.
Yeah.
But what was gained,
Right.
right? And these were abuses. Yes.
Right. And this happens already in the New Testament, where people are upset at Paul. Well, if you preach grace, right, the Judaizers are all worked up. Well, then people aren't going to do this, whatever.
And then you flip to Corinthians, you're like, yeah.
Yeah, really quick.
Yeah.
Along those lines, something that did happen amongst Protestants, and especially nominally Lutheran Protestants back in the day in Germany, especially, also was this notion that all religion kind of, you know, we can objectively study religion and we're going to find the similarities in each. And there was a confidence that Christianity would come out on top as far as being the most comprehensive, like the best. But we're going to compare all these and we'll get all the kernels of truth. And that led to a real skepticism about the Bible as an inspired, you know, infallible text. And it became a book like many others. And the real driving engine in such an approach was the person standing over all the texts. And then they're going to put together, well, this is what religion should be. And some said, well, religion is being good to your neighbor, right? Religion is recognizing that we're dependent upon, you know, this universal whatever. And that is, I wouldn't say it's one to one with how many Christians approach religion today. And most would have no clue about these movements in church history. But boy, that is how even I'm tempted often to approach Christianity. I'm going to stand over it and try to understand it. And then if I understand it well enough, I'll be good at it. And
It's like the guy who tried all the different religions.
yeah. And it fits with Ecclesiastes, right? That's Solomon's. I'm just going to try everything out. I'm going to figure everything out. And at a certain point, you have to be tired out and just God shows up with some angels at your place, right? As with Abraham. And then what's the next text? Abraham negotiates with God over Sodom. Like, what if there's 10? And that text is so much fun because every time I read it, I expect God to reprimand him because Abraham's essentially telling him how to be God. I mean, would it be just to do this? Would it be? And God just kind of like patiently bears it and concedes to him. But God's right there, right? The pre-incarnate Christ is right there. Abraham is interacting with God. The apostles, how often when they went wrong, wasn't it because Jesus is right there, they're in their 3 years of seminary with him, and they start speculating, and Jesus is right there, and then Jesus will say something, maybe a little smart alecky even about like, what are you guys even talking about, right? What are you wasting your time with? The church needs to remember Jesus is right here. If you're a pastor, when you're preaching, Christ is speaking through you. If you're hearing, Christ is speaking to you. From the altar, you get the very body and blood of Christ. Those baptismal waters, God is in those waters, right? He's present right there. This is not a presence we have to manufacture, which is a great temptation as well, where we have to create an atmosphere and help people to feel the presence of God. God is present, and God is not an idea, and that ought to shape and galvanize how we do ministry and how we live our Christian life. When I'm carrying out my vocation, Christ is right there. He's right there in the person of my neighbor, but he's also right there working through me. My vocation is not an abstract thing of like, well, if you do the math, technically God is using this. This is a...
Or it's my calling or what.
Yeah. This is not a spiritual thing in the sense of like you rightly noted, Michael, that it's an idea thing. It's an actual concrete fleshly thing. In my flesh, God is serving my neighbor in my neighbor's flesh, and it's the same God who took flesh for me. And I see in my own life, and I just wonder how often for Christians in the church too, we need to step back and just be reminded, whoa, you're doing math now, and math isn't bad, but I'm adding things up. That's not how Mike has a relationship with his daughter. That's not how I know my Uncle Bob. I don't know, whatever Jason does. Who's your person? You didn't pick a person.
I have not picked a person yet, no.
So we'll think of one so we have an illustration at some point. Okay. This is why we got the microphone.
Oh,
But this is a concrete thing, and I know you've talked about before, right? There's a good way and a bad way to be manipulated. Manipulate's a great word. It's someone kind of just getting in there with their hands, their fingers, and trying to work things out a certain way. God does manipulate us in good ways, right? Because human beings are moved by things. But when we feel we need to manipulate people or be manipulated as far as so we'll like God, that's not how it works, right? The person who says to you, I just can't believe it in a God like that, maybe they've read Luther's Small Catechism. They're right. I can't by my own thinking or choosing. But he's still going to be God, and it sure would be good if you believed in him. And what do we need for that? We need more than just the kind of abstract law notions. God has to break in the gospel and say, look, I'm me, and I'm what you need. And I'm not Plato. I'm flesh and blood, a Nazarene, etc.
And I think maybe another episode idea, playing off the idea of true myth, right? Like we're going to make up stories to help us explain this.
Mm-hmm.
And the ancient stories tried to help explain this. And their stories often, they had heroes, but often was a very angry, somehow God. There was evil.
Yeah.
What are what stories are we used to? Rom-coms.
Yeah.
And so we put God into this. God's my friend. God's my therapeutic whatever. God's my coach.
My higher power.
All of these things. I mean, we don't even hide it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we'll even say,
right? Yeah.
Jesus is like this coach or whatever, and it's so, again, that's the idea. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say my wife is my coach or my whatever, because she's a real person.
Right. And if you were, this would never happen, but let's say you and Amanda were struggling in your marriage, mm-hmm. right? It's fair to say if any of us were struggling in our marriage, it's pretty much our fault, probably. But let's say you and Amanda were struggling, and so you came to Pastor Johnston. I'm not going to try to convince you guys that each other exists. I'm not going to try to convince you guys you should like each other. I'm going to say, this is Michael and this is Amanda, and you love each other, right? That this is how it goes, and that love builds trust. But I'm not going to say I have to sell you on each other, because that's going to wax and wane again right away.
Well, and to put not reverse the analogy, but put it onto relationships. How often are there problems in relationships because you married an idea and not a person?
Yeah.
So why are you married? Literally marrying God, right? You are married to God.
Yeah, Ephesians 5.
And that's not an idea,
right? Yeah, that's what Paul is getting at.
And then to, like, how many times do marriages like, well, I married whenever, I know I've said this before, and it's a jerk thing to say, but when someone says, I married my best friend, I automatically think you should have more friends. Because you're fine if you married your best friend, that's cool. But your spouse is more than your friend, and you probably should have friends. You're marrying an idea there. Why then do you make God friend, coach, all these things? Now, can I use the analogy of friend? Like I have a friend in a high place, like he is.
We just sang "What a Friend We Have in Jesus."
He is beneficial to me. Like he has favor Dei.
Yeah, he's a patron to me.
Yeah. All of those things. But if that's the lens by which you look at God, you've limited something, and you've limited it to an idea that looks a lot like your other relationships.
So the story thing, and we'll just have to do an episode on this, but I had Theology on Tap, and I was talking about Lord of the Rings, and someone said, oh, you got to listen to The Hobbit on Audible with the guy who does the voice of Gollum. He reads the whole book. So I just finished listening to that. I just binged it. And the guy does great. You would like this too, Jason.
Yeah, he does a version of the Screwtape Letters too.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. Yeah. And he does a great job. But so, and I'm reading through the Space Trilogy. I've never read the Space Trilogy before by Lewis, and really good. But if you think of stories, and you could throw like Marvel into this, or Star Wars, stuff like that, stories that really catch people, sometimes you'll have subcultures that come out of that, and then people are going to, what do you call that, cosplay or whatever. They're going to act like the characters. And they will be very fastidious about if something actually is canon or not. Mm-hmm. And, right, is that accurate? Does it fit? And they're doing this about fictional people, but why do they care so much? Because the story, right? They've been drawn into the story. And those people, because they've been drawn into the story, are something more than just ideas. If you're reading a novel and you only come to identify with the characters on an idea level, it's not a very good, right, novel. They haven't drawn you in.
Yeah, when you read a good novel, you visualize the person.
Yeah. Well, how much more with true myth, with the story of all stories, ought we not recognize there's a canon, and there's actually, right, Christ is Christ, you know that. But instead, we're like cool with like all this cosplaying of Christ
Yeah, that's
that
interesting.
doesn't fit the
Right.
actual story. And I think that's the part of the power of what a Lewis, a Tolkien, and others do is recapturing. And I know you've talked about this, Michael, and I think Craig Parton's talked about this, right? You got to aim not just for the head, but for the heart as well. And in story, those things can kind
And
of align.
we don't mean superficial feelings with heart.
Right, no. But what God created us, right, to be more than just
To
mind.
be lovers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you guys for indulging me with the
was
topic.
good.
Any closing thoughts you have?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, so much of this stuff too is that, we've seen how, I mean, both in the thinking side of it, but also then this leads to the doing. I mean, it brings people back to a turn inward, and which again is, I mean, works great as I turn inward. I'm only drawn more and more to this, my own ideas, right? And God as idea and all these other things. But of course, that as I turn inward, I'm also turned more toward self and sinful nature and all those other things, which of course is going to be a problem. And it just, you see it kind of feed off of itself.
Yeah, there's
I have a feeling that the sermon at your church in St. John's Morago is going to be similar this Sunday.
That's good though. I'm gonna on Provost Day in my presentation. I'm gonna be talking a little bit about the beatific vision, and Mike knows I've been thinking about this, and we've been thinking about this because it worked its way a little bit into the book we were working on. But there's this great story. Is it Nicholas of Cusa?
That sounds right.
My phone is recording, so I can't look it up. But Cusa, whatever. So he, this medieval theologian, and he goes and he sees an icon, and I think it maybe was patterned after, like, supposedly, Veronica put the cloth on Jesus and his face shows. And so it's maybe, I don't know, kind of here with Jesus' eyes. And he sees this somewhere, and the eyes follow you. And so he gets an icon like this, and he sends it back to his brothers at the monastery. And he says, okay, set it up in the room, and then this many of you stand in the middle, this many on the side, this many on the side. And you look at the icon, and then all switch, rotate. And Jesus is still looking at you. And one of the cool things in thinking about the beatific vision, it's kind of like the question of, well, how can Christ's body be on all the altars in Christianity, all at the same time? Well, A, it doesn't have to be on the Baptist altars, and but B, because it's Christ's body. Well, how is Christ going to see us and know us all at once? Because he's Christ. And if you think of the Gospels, you said something earlier that was good, Michael, and I didn't get a chance to jump in, but about, right, we see people, right, individuals, and God sees individuals. It's striking in the Gospels how often Jesus stops something because he sees an individual and gets lost in that individual. Mark 5 is this way, right? The woman who touches him, and Jairus had to be like, what in the world? There's this whole crowd, and he sees this woman, and at his crucifixion, he sees his mother, right? He has these interactions in the midst of all these things. He zeroes in, and so it's kind of like that icon that he's talking about, that we will look at Christ. Okay, good. He will see us as if there's only us, and we will see him, and we won't see an idea. We'll see the face of God, right? That same Christ is the Christ who is with you in word and sacrament. That same Christ is the one who is working through you in your vocations. And having a Christ like that who doesn't depend on your thinking that day or your feeling that day ought to be one of the most liberating things there is, because there's a face that is the object of your trust. There is a love that gives you the confidence of faith for all you do. And I would say that is the heart and core of what it is to let the bird fly.
That was good.
Just remember that the video is still
I know.
recording.
I want to turn this air conditioning on.
We got one more Winging It session, Michael.
I've thought about that.
We're sweating off the weight from the scale going up.
Oof.
It's all right. At
Not
least
good.
you had a good reason. You were in Europe. Jason just had cornbread
That's right.
and undid me.
Yeah.
It's like my
where
crack.
where was the wedding reception at?